Hey everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to Cinefessions, where we talk all things media. So this past Friday, my buddy and I intended to go see Dune Part 2 in theaters. However, I hadn't gotten around to watching Dune Part 1 over the week, so we ended up having to push that back. Instead, though, since we had this time already planned, we decided to check out, admittedly, a mediocre-looking horror film in Imaginary. So today, I want to share with you guys my thoughts on this new horror movie, see if it's maybe something I think you might want to run out and check out in theaters, or maybe wait for that home media release, or possibly even streaming. So let's talk about it, guys. Before we get into it, if you have a quick second, go ahead and hit that like button down below. That engagement really does help me out. But with that said, let's not waste any more time at all. Let's dive right into my review of 2024's Imaginary. So Imaginary is directed by Jeff Wadlow, who honestly, I didn't recognize that name coming into it, but turns out I do have 4 movies of his in my physical media collection. Cry Wolf from 2005. This is like a mid-2000s slasher film. I remember enjoying it when I watched it back in the mid-2000s, but boy, I can't tell you anything about it now. On top of that, he also directed the sequel to Kick-Ass with Kick-Ass 2. Love the original, have not checked out the sequel, so I don't know how he did with that. And these other 2 I've not seen either, but both of these are more recent. I believe they're 2018 and 2020, and both of them are Blumhouse productions, just like Imaginary. But we have, both of these are starring Lucy Hale from Pretty Little Liars, which is the reason I wanted to see them. But we have Truth or Dare and Fantasy Island. So again, I've not seen these, but chances are you might have, so you have an idea of who the director is coming into this one. Me, I was coming in relatively blind because the last movie I've seen from him was back in the mid-2000s. My expectations were extremely low heading into this movie because it looked like just a forgettable horror film. So what did we end up getting here? Well, with Imaginary, we are following a family of 4. We have the father, played by Tom Payne. We have a 15-year-old daughter, and somewhere around 10 years old is the other daughter. And then we have the stepmother to the children. That is Jessica, played by DeWanda Wise. Now, honestly, I didn't recognize her while I was watching the film, but she was in Jurassic World Dominion. I don't remember the character. I don't remember her at all, frankly, but she was in there, so you might recognize her from that. So we are following this family. The film opens up with this nightmare sequence that Jessica has, kind of a recurring nightmare she has. And so they decide, since they're moving back into her childhood home within the next couple weeks anyway, let's just pack up and go tonight, as opposed to waiting for over, the next few weeks for the house to be finalized. So that's what they decide to do. They're moving into her childhood home a little bit early. When they get there, it's basically the struggles of the stepmother trying to come to terms with the teenage daughter more specifically, and just getting along, right? That's always going to be an issue in a situation like that. So we follow as they're trying to get along, but at the same time, we have this 10-year-old who wants to play around. She is 10 years old. That's what they do. And so they want to play hide and seek one day. Well, she stumbles upon the basement, and she happens to open up this door, and there is a teddy bear there. And that, of course, is going to introduce her to this imaginary friend. And so the whole movie is, what is this imaginary friend? Is there maybe something not imaginary about this friend? And how is it related to Jessica and her childhood? Because that whole story kind of unravels as the film progresses. What's going on with the creepy neighbor lady and the annoying teenage boy next door? So there's all these different things happening here. And of course, it's all going to revolve around this titular imaginary friend. It's interesting to me that Jeff Wadlow started his horror career in the mid-2000s, because something I remember from that era is a horror film that looked awesome in the trailer. I go to the theater to see it. It has an amazing opening sequence and then kind of falters throughout the rest of the movie. I specifically think of something like Boogeyman, the mid-2000s one, not the most recent one, and the Tooth Fairy movie whose name, When Darkness Falls, that one as well. Those are 2 that immediately come to mind, but there are plenty others, but that's what I'm thinking of right now. Fortunately, this doesn't fall into that trap too much. The opening sequence is done pretty well. Not quite as scary as some of those others I've mentioned, but it does it pretty pretty well and then takes off from there. Fortunately, I think it gets better as the film progresses in terms of the scares, at least. Something I really want to touch on right at the start here is the acting. Now, it is extremely rare that I will say a film is poorly acted. I don't know if that's, due to my background or what. I just am more forgiving of acting. I don't know. But either way, I rarely say that. And this time through, I'm not going to say the acting is bad. What I'll say is that I don't believe these characters. I don't believe the situations that they're in, whether it's something as simple as a relationship. Now, to get more specific, the couple in the film, Max and Jessica, the stepmother and the father of these kids, they have scenes together that there's no chemistry whatsoever between these two, and they don't feel believable to me. And when that happens, then you start kind of nitpicking a little bit with the acting, and that kind of stayed true throughout the entire film. I'll admit, once there were heightened moments where there were scares and things were kind of going awry, I thought the acting actually picked up, and those moments were a lot better. But it was the family moments, the softer, the quieter moments leading up to that are supposed to be there to make you like these characters or make you dislike them, whatever the director's trying to do. In this instance, you're trying to, understand these characters, figure out what's going on with them. Those moments I didn't believe, and so it makes the second half of the film, or, the final quarter of the film, it doesn't let it land quite as well as if these were characters that I was having a great time with and enjoying and believing throughout those scenes. I will admit, though, that a lot of this is probably due to the writing in this film. This is as textbook horror movie as you could imagine, for the most part. Yes, there are some things that it does that might be a little unique or different, but for the most part, this is your bog standard horror film. We have different moments in this film where I literally was thinking to myself in the theater, well, this is what's going to happen next. And then it would happen a couple seconds later. Just the way it's written, it is so very obvious what is going to be happening next for, again, these smaller moments, these character beats that they're supposed to be building. And it just makes, it hurts the acting in the film and makes the whole thing feel dragged down a bit because the script is just so standard and I don't know, there's nothing special about it whatsoever. That said, the idea of this film, the premise, I think is really cool, and there are genuinely creepy moments in this. Frankly, this was one of, not the first horror film I watched with my buddy, but the first that had a lot of jump scares, which, throw that out right there, there are jump scares in this. Some people hate those, some people love them. I have a great time with them, so I'm happy they were there. But anyway, my buddy at the end of the movie was like, yeah, you jumped. It scared him as he was eating his food because he wasn't expecting me to jump. So I definitely jumped multiple times in this movie, which for me, that's fun. That's what I look for in my horror films. I like it like this anyway. I could go on about the different things I love in horror films, but in something that is kind of as standard and that looked as forgettable as this, make me jump, creep me out a little bit, scare me the best you can, and maybe it will be a little bit less forgettable. And I think it does that pretty well here. I thought there were really cool moments where there's things in the background that, frankly, if you're not paying attention, you could have missed them. Now, yes, it does linger on those maybe a little bit longer than some other more sophisticated horror films will, but this is just a popcorn horror flick. You're gonna get what you're gonna get with something like this. I have no idea why I decided to pull down so many movies for this video, but either way, I pulled down another one because this film really reminded me of The Boogeyman, and this one I believe was in theaters last year. I didn't see it in theaters. I watched it at home and was just not disappointed, but I just expected more, especially from the director on this because he did Host. Phenomenal. Like, Host is an amazing movie, so I was expecting more here, but the reason it reminds me of The Boogeyman is because we are following these two siblings. One of them is seeing things and the other is trying to figure out what's going on. So it was another like child horror film, essentially. And so that's why it reminded me a bit of that. And honestly, I think this one does it better than The Boogeyman. The star rating at the end of this video might be the same, but if I was ranking them, I would put Imaginary above The Boogeyman because I found the scare sequences in this, the jump scares, they just worked better. I enjoyed this one more than that, so, at least it has that going for it. But that said, this is still not a great movie. Is it a forgettable horror film? For the most part, probably. Ask me again in a month or two if I remember a lot of details about this, and I probably won't. There is one thing I will remember though, and there is this giant stuffed teddy bear that comes to life, and it reminded me of this zombie bear that my wife got from a horror convention over a decade ago. It looked like that zombie bear brought to life, and that was so freaking cool. I loved that. That's the other thing. I think the creature in this, the bad guy in this, I think looks really good for the most part. I wish we got more of him or her, it, whatever, in its original form or its standard form, because to me, that was the creepiest look for it. But yeah, this is an interesting film in the premise. The acting and the writing, though, they're just not great. Again, the acting does get better as the film progresses when you get to those higher emotional moments, but I just didn't believe the whole setup of the movie, which can be a problem in something like this. But again, it's a popcorn horror film, so maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on it. Is this one worth seeing? Well, if you like the premise, you like this director, that's going to be completely up to you. If it was me and I knew what I was getting into before getting into it, I don't think I would have needed to see this one in theaters. This would have been one that I caught on Peacock or Netflix, wherever it was streaming down the road. And then maybe I'll add it to my physical media collection down the line if I find it cheap at Disc Replay for $5 or $6. But that's kind of what this one is. It feels like something like The Boogeyman or what I imagine Fantasy Island or Truth or Dare are going to be. Popcorn horror films aimed at a very specific teenage audience, because this is a PG-13 rated horror film. That was one of the first things my buddy asked me when we got out. He goes, was that rated PG-13? I was like, yeah. He goes, yeah, we need to stick to R-rated, which, like, I get it. That said, though, I still think PG-13 can do the scares well, and the jumps on this one worked quite well. But other than that, just not a whole lot going for it. So I am going to give Imaginary from 2024 3 out of 5 stars. All right, so I'm sure that review ended up going on longer than I anticipated, but hopefully you know now if this is a movie that you want to go out and see in theaters, if you're going to wait for the disc, or maybe you'll just hit up the streaming service that it will inevitably end up on sometime down the road here. But let me know what your thoughts are on this review. Do you like me doing movie reviews from theatrical watches, or should I stick to the discs? Let me know what your thoughts are. And if you've seen Imaginary, tell me what you thought of that. What's your star rating? Leave that down in the comments below as well. But that's going to do it for today, guys. I will mention, though, I did watch Dune Part 1 today, so we are going to see Dune Part 2 in theaters next weekend. Let me know if you want a review of either of those films as well. Maybe that's something I can manage to do too, but we will see. Anyway, that's it, guys. So before you go, if you could just hit that like button down below, that engagement really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. But with that said, guys, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, I just want to encourage you all, consume some media today. I'll catch you next time.